If I get everyone's attention so we can begin the speaking portion of our breakfast. Just want to wish you all a late St. Patrick's Day greeting. Nice to see you've all survived. In Boston, it's not a day that we celebrate, it's like a month long. We have several more events down in Boston this month regarding the Holy Day. But I just want to, I was a young man when it began, my God. I just want to welcome all of you to the New England Council breakfast here. I would like to start by thanking our sponsor, once again, BAE Systems, represented today by Mark Ward. He's the Vice President and General Manager of the BAE business, which is just down the road in Merrimack. You all know that they've been a very active member of the New England Council, but they are an outstanding corporate leader here in New England, and all these worthy causes that people ask for the support, BAE is always there, and they really believe in being part of the community, and today is another example in offering their generous support and being a host here today, so we want to thank you. 2019 has gotten off to a very, very busy start for the New England Council, and we have some more events planned in the next couple of weeks. I think by the end of March, we probably will reach almost 30 events that we have already put on since January in all 6 New England states and in Washington, which is extraordinary. And we have not taken our foot off the pedal at all. Tomorrow we'll be in Providence to hear from Congressman Jim Langevin of the 1st Congressional District. We'll be in Boston this week, March 22nd, for our first Congressional Roundtable, similar with what we're doing today, with newly elected Congresswoman Ayanna Pressley. Next week we'll be in Washington for our Capitol Conversation with Congressman Joe Courtney of Connecticut. April 5th, we're very pleased to partner with the JFK Library and Business Roundtable of Massachusetts for a special event exploring the 21st century moonshot, where we'll have keynote remarks from author Douglas Brinkley. We'll be back in the Granite State for our 8th Politics and Eggs of the year, this time with Maryland Governor Larry Hogan. And that will be just up the road at St. A's with Neil Levesque, who runs the Institute and does a fabulous job there, fabulous job, and they are lucky to have him. In April, we'll be hearing from Massachusetts Attorney General Maura Healey, Governor Charlie Baker, and Rhode Island's Senior Senator, Senator Jack Reed. And then on May 8th and 9th, we hope you'll join us in Washington for our annual conference that we gather some 250 people from all over New England, fly down for 2 days, and they hear from members of Congress, the United States Senate, cabinet officials, authors, reporters for the Washington Post, New York Times. It's just a great day and a half. We have a major reception on the Hill, the Kennedy Caucus Room, where Bobby Kennedy, John Kennedy announced their candidacy for president. And we have every member of Congress, 21 members of Congress, the 12 United States Senators, all gather at a reception. There's no speeches. Everybody's mingling and networking. It's just a fabulous event. It's just one of many that we'll be hosting down there on May 8th and 9th, so hopefully many of you will be coming here. So it's a great opportunity for all of you. So with that, I don't know if my friend wants to do a formal introduction. If not, I'll... do you want to say a few words on behalf of BAE?
Go ahead.
Okay, all right. This is easy. I've already met the congressman. I know him well because I've heard from many members of the congressional delegation talk about him, and they talk about him in glowing terms. So you have obviously elected a very good man, to say the least. Many of you know that he is now in his first term in the United States Congress, replacing Carol Shea Porter. He's a lifelong resident of this great city of Manchester, where he's perhaps best known for his family's popular restaurant, the Puritan Back Room, which he has helped run since graduating from that little school down in Cambridge. You may have heard of Harvard University. And the joke yesterday with Charlie Baker, if you heard it on the TV. Charlie was accepted in Harvard by checking off the right box. Liberal. But, you know, I'm not saying this, your congressman is liberal. I'm just saying that's how Charlie, that was a joke. Just a joke, you know. But he entered public service in 2002 when he was elected to the New Hampshire State Legislature. He served for 2 terms. He went on to serve 2 terms, Hillsborough County Treasurer, and then later was elected to New Hampshire Executive Council to represent District 14, which includes 19 communities.
District 4.
District 4? Oh, I have 14 here. What? I think under redistricting, I think they changed it to 14. They probably didn't tell them. Yeah, Lou Delisano says, no, it's 14. I said, are you sure? Yeah, they just did the map last night. I said, okay, I didn't know. This is what's very, very important in the 116th Congress. He's been appointed to two very important committees. And again, as a freshman, it's to be on these 2 committees says a lot of how people view him. First, he serves on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee, where he'll be on the front lines of any effort to pass a major infrastructure investment package in the near future. So it's critical that New England has a seat at the table in these important negotiations. So we're fortunate to have the congressman there. I think there's only one other congressman in New England that's on this committee, and that's Stephen Lynch in Boston. So we need another voice to advocate for New England, and the leadership of the Democratic caucus has chosen Chris to be that voice. He's also going to serve in the House Veterans Affairs Committee, where he has pledged to be an advocate for the region's veterans and to fight to expand access to services, benefits, and resources for those who have bravely served our country. And I know there's some veterans that are here today, and they already approached me by saying they were excited to hear that he's been appointed to this committee. So these are 2 important committees for our region. So needless to say, the leadership thinks very, very highly of him. His colleagues think very highly of him. And I think he's going to be an outstanding representative for your district here, and you've chosen wisely. And with that, we're honored that he's about to make his maiden speech here to the New England Council. So we're honored that you could join us here today. We're very eager to hear from you and give a warm welcome to the Honorable Congressman, Chris Pappas.
Well, Jim, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And just to be clear here, this is not the breakfast where presidential candidates show up to speak to this group, right? I just want to make sure I'm at the right one here. Well, thank you for what you do, Jim, to really take things to the next level for the New England Council and the collective voice that represents for folks across the region. I know as I get into my role, it's really helpful to hear from people back home. I've met with some of you in my office, and I know my staff looks forward to other ways that we can engage you as time moves on. And you know, knowing where the New England Council stands on an issue is critically important for us as a region to make those right decisions and make sure that we're advocating appropriately down in Washington. So congratulations to Jim, the New England Council, and the staff for all that they've done here. It's great to see so many familiar faces in the crowd. Senator D'Alessandro, welcome. Nice to be with you here this morning. I know we have Representative Danielson as well, who represents Bedford. Great to see you guys. Thanks for all you do to give back to our state. And I just have to say, it's an honor to be serving you all. I've served you in other capacities, certainly in my restaurant business, where I know I've seen many of you over the years. Usually the top question I get in Washington when people come into the office is, where are the chicken tenders and the ice cream? We're working on that. There have been some other priorities that have gotten in the way, but maybe we'll solve that riddle before the term is up. I've certainly learned countless lessons about the world around me from that restaurant experience. I've learned that it's not about you or the bottom line, but about how you can serve those around you and about how you can serve the customer. And I've learned that you should treat people with dignity and respect. You should treat people as members of your extended family. The customer always comes first. I'm really excited that we have a couple of offices that we're going to be opening in New Hampshire so that we can serve the constituents of the state. We have one in Dover that's up and running, a second one that's going to be opening on Elm Street in Manchester, which is actually going to occupy the footprint of the restaurant that my great-grandfather opened in the early 1900s. It's going to be in the same location. So we're literally coming full circle. with the restaurant experience and I guess how that has well informed me and steeped me in the values of this community, and I think how we can address our role in a responsible manner. Look, I think we all understand that there's a stark disconnect between Washington, D.C. and between how we can get things done and move things forward here in the Granite State. We have a state that is driven by this community spirit, by a citizen-led democracy, and I think from the outside, Washington looks like a morass where it's just sort of a race to the bottom in terms of the negative politics that divide us. Here we can talk to one another, we can get things done, we can make a difference. The divide in our nation's capital is as wide as ever, but I think we can't accept that this is business as usual. I got a lot of advice when I was running for Congress, some of it better than others. When I was thinking about running early on, I had several people tell me, don't do it. Washington is beyond repair. There's nothing you can do about it to change a broken system. And I don't want to believe that that's as good as we're going to get. And I think we all recognize that unless we're involved, unless we're part of the positive change that we all know we want to see, then we're not going to get any better. So I'm really thrilled to be a part of it, and thrilled that we have such a vibrant incoming class, the largest since Watergate, that I think has a great shot at not becoming part of the system, but changing the system fundamentally. So at the end of 12 months of campaigning, I finished more optimistic than when I started out. Optimistic because I met so many people across this state. And you know, the people of New Hampshire are very kind, decent, they're engaged. And I think if we continue to look for ways to model ourselves in Washington after the direct democracy that we have here in New Hampshire, and we just had town meeting day, we have this presidential primary that's rolling forward, that's how we're going to get a system that's more responsive. So our class, I think, is deeply rooted in our own districts. We're more proximate to the people than anyone else in Congress. And in terms of the Republicans and Democrats that are there, we're the largest class since Watergate. We have more women and more people of color than at any time in the history of Congress. We're also 10 years younger on average than the rest of Congress, which is an interesting factor, and I think has really helped us sort of bring about a refreshing of the institution. I was in an elevator on swearing-in day, and there were so many people that were excited to be there to support family members. I was with a group of family members of a more senior member of Congress. I was telling them how I was very excited to be there, how I was so thrilled to be working for the people of New Hampshire. And after a few minutes, they said, "So, which member of Congress are you interning for?" And in talking to some of my colleagues, they've had similar experiences. I'm actually a little bit older than some of the incoming members of Congress. We've got some 29-year-olds, and so this is not an uncommon occurrence. But I think it tells you that we look a little bit different than Congress has traditionally looked, and I think that's a good thing. Look, I think we all hope to get down to business right off the bat, but we came in the midst of the longest government shutdown in American history. And that was very frustrating for those of us that were eager to get to work, especially when you consider that 800,000 federal workers were being used essentially as political pawns. They weren't getting paid, they were furloughed for 35 days. I spent January and part of February working with our staff here in New Hampshire, trying to help thousands of federal workers that needed financial support. And what was really amazing to see was that so many businesses and banks and credit unions stepped forward to assist these individuals. And that's really the New Hampshire way of doing business. But it shouldn't have fallen on their shoulders to have solved that puzzle. It should have been our government that got it right and never got into that situation in the first place. I hope there are a few takeaways from that shutdown. First, I think shutting down the government is never an appropriate strategy to get your way in our political system. And second, I think if we can get everyone in a room, if we can keep people talking, then we can find compromise that may seem even elusive. I hope the deal that ended the shutdown, which was brought about with a conference committee of appropriators from the House and the Senate, I hope that will be a deal that can help set the tone for how we move forward and how we work through our differences on other issues. We've got to prevent that from ever happening again, and there are lots of bills that I've co-sponsored to try to do that. My favorite is, let's take away pay from the members of Congress until government is actually funded. I think if you put the financial burden on those in power as opposed to our federal workers, we would never see a shutdown like that again. And I think we all want to commit ourselves to making sure we get there. So if there's any sense of normalcy in Congress, I think it has returned. since mid-February. Committees are up and running. I've begun to lean into my work on the House Transportation and Infrastructure Committee as well as the House Veterans Affairs Committee. These are both very bipartisan committees. They operate with a broad consensus about how to approach their missions. And I think the prospects for an infrastructure bill are great. There are two components that we need to address in such a bill. First, we need to reauthorize the FAST Act, which distributes federal highway aid to states, and it expires in 2020. New Hampshire will see a 60% cut in our federal allocation of highway dollars if nothing is done. So there's an opportunity, I think, to make additional investments beyond just reauthorizing surface transportation. The president's talked a lot about it. I think you hear Republicans and Democrats that share that view that we need to do something to improve our airports, ports, water systems, rail systems in a way that can create jobs and create the framework for economic success in the future. Representative Stephen Lynch and I are the two New England representatives on transportation. I think we're eager to make sure that any bill that moves forward meets the needs of our region and creates stability and predictability for states in terms of the funding that comes from Washington. Since 2005, we've seen a 20% decrease in the federal share of transportation investment. So that represents sort of a downshifting of costs to states and municipalities. And I think we've got to make sure that the federal government steps up to the plate in a more meaningful way, and that we do it in a way where there is stability to the funding stream moving forward. You know, New Hampshire, interestingly enough, gets the least amount of highway aid of any state in the country. We're even behind Vermont. We have more lane miles than Vermont does, more people than Vermont does, more geography, but yet we get about half the amount of federal dollars coming back to New Hampshire than Vermont does. And so one of the things I want to urge the committee to take a look at is the fairness in the allocation, in the formula that distributes highway grants to New Hampshire. I happen to be the only New England member on the Veterans Affairs Committee, where there's certainly much work to do. I think we're all familiar with the experience at the Manchester VA, the significant concerns that have arisen over the last few years, the leadership change, which I think many of us recognize as a breath of fresh air for that facility. And I look forward to working with the new leadership and the director to make sure that we oversee this period of transition. We have also seen a number of key pieces of legislation passed in the last session, such as the VA Mission Act, which we need to make sure that we oversee the implementation of in a way that lives up to the promise that we've all made to our veterans. I'm going to be chairing the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee of the VA Committee. I'm one of 14 freshmen who's chairing a subcommittee. And as I said, implementation is an important responsibility of that subcommittee, as well as ensuring that there's no undue influence of outside actors over the VA. And there have been some questions raised around that, and we will be having hearings coming up over the next few weeks. So I think those are some good bipartisan committees. Beyond that, there are two task forces that I've signed up to join, one on PFAS, which I think is critically important to this district. And in addition to that, there's the opioids task force that Andy Custer chairs. And we need to continue to insist that New Hampshire gets the dollars it needs to fully build out this hub and spoke approach, which I think holds great promise for us to make sure that there are access points all over our state. So the flow of business in the House has begun to move forward. We've seen legislation move through the House, including some marquee pieces of legislation. We, in a bipartisan, bicameral way, passed a resolution that was looking to undo the national emergency declaration that the president issued. I think there's broad concern about what that would do to military construction dollars, especially with respect to the Portsmouth Naval Shipyard. That is a $1 billion economic engine for the region, 7,000 jobs there. We have to protect the projects that are underway and the ones that are just over the horizon to make sure we can continue to modernize that facility. In addition to that, the House passed H.R. 4, which is a universal background check bill. It's a broadly supported bill by the American people that I think is a common sense measure that's going to help us address the issue of gun safety, save lives, while respecting the rights of responsible gun owners. We passed H.R. 1, which is a democracy reform package, shores up ethics rules, limits the influence of big money in our campaigns, makes it easier and not harder to vote. And we also introduced a bipartisan group of us last week, the Equality Act, which ensures that we ban discrimination against the LGBT community all across this nation. In the coming weeks, I think we'll also see bipartisan bills around shoring up the healthcare exchanges and lowering the cost of prescription drugs. So look, the American people spoke loudly and clearly this past fall. They wanted us to work together. And I think we're seeing the beginnings of this. We're seeing some important work that's being done. And oftentimes I think you'll see the news and you'll see the most extreme or outrageous statement that someone's made, and you'll wonder what's happening down there. But from the inside, what I can tell you is that there's a dedication to trying to get this right, to trying to move past the divisions of even earlier this year, to find our footing and find a way where we can serve the people of this nation in a responsible manner. And I'm dedicated to doing that in a way that owns up to the values of our state. You know, when I walk to the Capitol each and every day, I feel the weight of the responsibility that the people of New Hampshire have placed in me. And there are certainly significant challenges, but I think they could be met if we remain proximate to our values and to the people. I also think of the advice that a more senior member of Congress gave me. He said, you have a very important job, but you are not a very important person. And as a Granite Stater, I wouldn't have it any other way. So I certainly look forward to working with all of you over the next couple of years. I thank you for what you do for our community and our state. And I look forward to your questions here this morning. Thank you all so much.
We have time for a few questions. Now let's ask the first question. Speaker Pelosi made a statement recently saying that she's not in favor of impeaching the president. And some people in the Democratic caucus were a little upset, far left, saying, wait a minute, you know, we ought to continue doing our investigation, continue our hearings. And basically she's saying that unless there's some overwhelming evidence that's coming out of the Miller report, and also that it be bipartisan if they were ever to do something like that, that they would need Republicans in the House to go along with, otherwise she would not support it. Is she making the right move? And what are you hearing from your colleagues?
I think that's about right. Look, this is a solemn constitutional responsibility. This is nothing any of us should take lightly. And I think you shouldn't do it for political reasons. You also shouldn't not do it for political reasons. So I think we have to let the facts take us to the responsible position of where we need to go. And I think we need to make sure that there's transparency, that this report sees the light of day so that we can have a full reckoning of what's transpired and that we can begin to rebuild confidence in the institutions of our government and our elections. And I think that's absolutely critical. So we've seen a number of guilty pleas and convictions. I think there's probably, unfortunately, more over the horizon there. But I think the American people deserve to know what's been happening so that they can help us make an assessment of how we should move forward.
Clyde Terry, do you have a question? Center,
Thanks, Jim.
Center for Independent
Happy
Living.
St. Patrick's Day, the day after. Congressman, thank you so much for your time and your service. My question really goes to your role on the Transportation Infrastructure Committee. In the last Congress, there was legislation that really was promoting the development and use of driverless vehicles, but it died before the end of the session. The reason that's important to the disability community is it opens up opportunities for greater employment opportunities and housing opportunities, allowing people to live where they want to live. And so I guess my question goes straightforward. What have you heard about that legislation? Would you be willing to help shepherd it through so that folks with disabilities and the rest of the general population look forward to the day when they can get behind a pod and get from here to there?
Yeah. Well, I've heard a great deal about this. This is an issue I think that there's broad interest in, from the disabilities community, certainly, also from, those who understand that this type of innovation can help support, economic growth in the future. So I think, folks understand that we need to make sure that we're getting this right, that the technology that is being developed around this is done so in a way that protects public safety. But I think there's great promise to this concept. What I've heard is that we should expect some hearings and further legislation on this year. So I look forward to getting in touch with you around that point in time when that does come forward so we can make sure that the disabilities community is represented in that discussion.
Other questions for the Congressman? Yes.
Congressman Pappas, great to see you. Good to have you in Congress. I'm very concerned about the deficit, and I wondered what your thinking is on that.
Yeah, thank you. The question was about the deficit, which unfortunately rarely comes up as a topic of discussion in Washington, believe it or not. That's probably one of the things I found most dismaying, is that as we kind of lurch from one manufactured fiscal crisis to the next, as we talk about appropriations, there's never the sense that we are living beyond our means, and that if we don't do something about it now, it's going to make it that much harder to undo the burden we're passing off to the next generation. So I'm deeply concerned about this. I did not support the tax bill of 2017 because I thought that it was not the appropriate time to be cutting taxes during a period of economic growth. That's the point in time where we should be getting our fiscal house in order. So I am deeply concerned about it because, look, it's going to crowd out our future priorities, our ability to make those smart investments in infrastructure and higher education in places that can help grow the economic pie. You know, I do have deep concern about that. I think we've got to set ourselves up for success because I think the way the system is structured right now, we're not going to be able to dig ourselves out of this hole. I think we need to make sure we get back to regular budgeting, to pay-as-you-go policies. I would like to see biennial budgeting because I think that would provide for more long-range planning and more of that kind of long-range discussion about how we make sure we're controlling costs and making sure we're not burdening future generations with things we're putting on the credit card today.
Other questions? Not all raise your hand at once and try to. AARP.
So,
Todd.
Congressman, good morning.
Morning.
Prescription drugs, I know you had some focus on that, and you talked about some of the drivers of, you know, people's economic distress, but also some of the budget issues and the shortfalls on the contributing to deficits, rather. What is your view about prescription drugs and things like secretarial negotiation, things like that?
Yeah, no, thanks for the question. In talking with my new colleagues, everyone campaigned on prescription drugs. This was just an issue that was resonant across the country. And so I think there's great promise for us to be able to do something on this. The President has put out some proposals. I think there are a number of things that we're going to see legislation around, and we'll get a sense by June, I think, what direction that is heading in. I think clearly we need more price transparency. You know, we see these really artificially high escalation of costs for individuals that need life-saving medications, and that's just not sustainable. For our healthcare system, I believe the cost of drugs is about 15%, and it's becoming a bigger share of overall healthcare costs. You know, allowing Medicare to negotiate drug prices, I think, is a critical priority. I know one that AARP supports, and there are a few competing bills on that proposal, you know, in this Congress. So I think we're going to see some legislation moving forward on this. I think we owe it to the American people because we're getting to a point where you know, we're seeing rationing of drugs, we're seeing individuals going without at a point in time where we need to make sure we have a healthcare system that is taking care of everyone. That's the bottom line.
Congressman Mike Clouser from Analog Devices. I think a key issue from the Transportation Infrastructure Committee, it's a weird jurisdictional thing, is something called dig once. So as you're getting these new highway dollars for New Hampshire, think about mandates that require a conduit for fiber optic cable to be put in when the dirt's first broken, so that later carriers and other folks can sort of put that fiber in very cheaply. It lowers the overall cost of broadband build out in rural communities as you do this through highways. It's not energy and commerce, it's T&I, and it's always kind of been held up for various reasons. So something to look at to sort of speed that broadband out to rural communities.
Yeah, no, I think that's a particularly salient issue for New Hampshire. And I think as we've looked at infrastructure projects in the past, we haven't always integrated all the various, you know, utilities upgrades that we could be doing at a point in time where there's a project underway. So I like that concept, and I'll pay attention to it as it comes up on the committee.
Tess?
Hi, thank you. I'm
Hi, Tess.
Tess Kenning, from Vice State representing the community health centers. And both Vermont and New Hampshire, I do a lot of the national work, and the health centers are the largest primary care network in the nation, serving almost 30 million people. So I know you're helping to support our appropriations of the $4 billion that we're going to lose starting in September. But what I'd like to ask you about is sort of in the shadow of the trade deficit and the debt and the and the deficit. What can be done about assuring that we have these entitlements for Medicaid and Medicare, and that low and moderate income families are protected?
Yeah, well, thanks for the question. And, you know, I don't like to call those programs entitlements. I think they're earned benefits. And I think folks have paid into a system over years, you know, through their working years, and they should be able to count on a dignified retirement and ensure that Medicare and Social Security are there for them when they need it. And I think that should be for today's retirees as well as tomorrow's. So I think we need to be smart about how we approach this. But I think that you know, the social safety net shouldn't be dismantled for us to bring things back into balance. Certainly there are ways that we can make those programs solvent. You know, I've signed on to legislation that Congressman Larson has proposed, Larson of Connecticut. It's called the Social Security 2100 Act. It looks to raise the cap on taxable earnings over time to the year 2100 to make the program solvent to the end of the century. And I think that's you know, a responsible way to approach that issue and to make sure that Social Security is there. So I think we need to have these sorts of discussions. We shouldn't just kind of muddle through. But I think that in terms of you know, making good on those promises, we should not be hedging at all. We should be protecting those programs because they've kept tens of millions of people out of poverty, and they're an important baseline for us to you know, protect.
Other questions?
Thanks, Jim.
Yep.
Ted Gorski, Get Your Edge, also host of the Leadership Edge on Bedford Community TV. Love to have you on the show. Maybe your people can talk to my people.
Great. I know it's weird to have people, but I've got some.
My people's here, right? Okay. Question I have, there's a lot of scuttlebutt on Washington about this thing called the Green New Deal. What's your take and what's your stance on that?
Yeah. Well, I haven't signed on to that resolution. I think it's critically important that we recognize that we're at an inflection point in terms of our ability to be able to control the amount of carbon dioxide release into the atmosphere and the amount of temperature rise that we're going to see in the ensuing decades. And I think we have a responsibility to do something meaningful that's going to allow us to move past dirty fossil fuels and have an economy that's driven by renewables. That's going to take some time, and I think the benchmarks that are set within that resolution are not realistic. I do think, though, that that resolution recognizes the urgency of the situation that we are in. I supported the creation of a select committee on climate change. They are up and running. And so I think, as opposed to a non-binding resolution, we should be looking at actual pieces of legislation that are going to address the climate issue. And so I'm hopeful that that committee is going to develop a framework of bills that they're going to be moving forward, you know, that we'll be able to consider. I do think this is, you know, a primary responsibility of ours, not to bury our heads in the sand, but to look for ways to make sure we're being responsible about leaving this planet better than we found it. There's, I think, a faulty argument out there that somehow supporting good environmental policy, combating climate change is at odds with our economic future. And I think the two go hand in hand. I think we are smart about our economic future when we support sustainable policies. When we reduce emissions and address climate change, we're going to be saving ourselves a lot of headache down the road and tremendous dislocation. I mean, we're already seeing the leading edge of what climate change is bringing to bear for New Hampshire. We're seeing our infrastructure along the seacoast crumbling as a result of rising sea levels and more severe storms. We're seeing the impact on our moose population and our pollinators. So we have a responsibility to address this, and I'd like to see you know, this Congress dig into some legislation that can allow us to do that.
Maybe I'll ask the last question. The Speaker created a special committee on modernization of Congress, to make it more efficient, make it run more smoothly. And Steny Hoyer, who happens to be, you know, second in line in Congress, has advocated the return of earmarks, because he thinks that that will help bring people together in both parties, that they have some skin in the game, and it seems to be gaining some momentum with other members bringing back the earmarks. I realize they've already decided this year they're not, but they're open for next year. Your thoughts on earmark? Should we have them, or should we continue the way it is?
Well, I think earmarks, it's an interesting discussion. I think this is one way where Congress can reassert its constitutional role and ensure that there is spending going toward appropriate projects. Obviously, we wouldn't want to see earmarks come back with the types of abuses that we've seen in the past. But I think if there's bipartisan consensus around this, let's create a process that's going to allow someone who is representing a district to work with stakeholders in that district to decide where those dollars are best spent. And as long as it's not growing the amount of money that is being allocated and we're looking to target dollars that are already being spent, it's something I would certainly support.
Well, we want to thank the Congressman on his maiden speech here.